Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our third webinar this semester and the 8th of the academic year, 2019-2020. So this is our second to last. We have one more next month. So we hope you can join us for that. This right here is the little book of Restorative Teaching Tools, a virtual book launch with Kathleen McGoey and Lindsey Pointer. So welcome all, and I will give you a quick orientation on how we are going to use Zoom for the next 90 minutes. So we're beginning at 4:30 and we will finish at exactly 6 o'clock. So you just know how to plan your time in that amount of time. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you can see the panelists, but you will not be able to see all the members who are attending because then you're all just watching us. So this is the orientation that I'm giving you, and then I'll turn it over to Kathy Evans. Dr. Kathy Evans is the host this evening. She will introduce the speakers, give you a little version of their bios. And with us also is Hannah Kunde, who is our graduate assistant here at the Zehr Institute for Restorative Justice. Once I give it to Kathy, then she will lead through the webinar, and at some point we'll come to a Q&A session that will be moderated by Kathy. And for that, we ask you to use the Q&A dialog box. For most people, it is at the bottom of your screen. It has a huge Q right next to it. I mean, on top of it, and Q&A at the very bottom. We ask you to submit all of your questions there. You will get other instructions on how to use the chat feature, but for the Q&A session, we ask you to use the Q&A dialog box. Once the webinar is finished, Hannah Kunde will take it over and give you some announcements of the upcoming events, and then kick it back over to Kathy Evans, who will close. One more thing, please do not use the raise hand feature, because we will not be monitoring that. It will not be of any consequence if you use it. So just quick go over, use the Q&A dialog box for Q&A session, chat feature for technical issues, and also for some other things that Kathleen and Lindsey will tell you about. And do not use the raise hand feature. Welcome, and we're happy to have you here. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Patience. Thank you so much. I am super looking forward to this afternoon. Lindsey Pointer and Kathleen McGoey have written a book that I believe will provide a lot of support and assistance to people who are teaching and training in restorative justice practices. I'm excited about their book. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Lindsey is an adjunct professor at Boise State University. She works with Kathleen at Longmont Community Justice Partnership. Both of them have done extensive peace building work, and they have studied extensively restorative justice and peace building. And so they have a lot of wisdom, not just in their knowledge of the field, but in their knowledge of the pedagogy. And this is what I'm particularly excited about, is how we teach restorative justice practices matters as much as what we teach. If we demonstrate and model restorative justice practice as we teach it, people learn it better. And so I'm really excited about them being with us today. Kathleen and Lindsey, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to what you're going to share with us today. So I think I turn it over to them now, right?
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you all so much for being here and for giving us your time in this way. We've been so looking forward to this session. I also want to acknowledge that it's just a really difficult time in the world right now, and there's a lot of heaviness and fear and uncertainty. And I'm sure that, like us, that's kind of swimming around in your brain right now. But it's also a time that we can see better than ever just how interconnected we all are. And it's more important than ever to have relationships and a chance to connect even from a physical distance. So we're hoping that this next hour and a half will be a chance for us to connect in that way, to have some conversation about a topic that we're all passionate about, and to kind of dive into this fun and exciting topic. And so thank you all for being here with us even in the midst of this difficulty. So in that vein, we wanted to start by doing a modified version of one of our favorite relationship building games. It's called SIA, and instructions for it are in the little book of restorative teaching tools, and yes, the book, and then also on the website, which is restorativeteachingtools.com, and we'll do a little tour of that website at the end of the time today. When we play this game in person, we divide the group into smaller groups of 4 people, and we're asking a discovery question to everyone. And in those groups of 4, they're discussing their answers and then determining a winner. So for example, we might ask, who has the most siblings? And in that group of 4, they're sharing how many siblings they have, determining who has the most. And that person then says, see ya, and moves on to the next group of 4. And so those groups are kind of changing, and everyone's getting a chance to speak with different people. Now, of course, we aren't all physically together today, but we did still want to ask some of our favorite questions from that game so that we could get a little chance to see who's here with us today, get to know each other a bit, and just get a feel for how those questions can help kind of build a connection and relationship. So when we ask you these questions, we'll be asking you to use the chat function on Zoom. So right at the bottom, you'll see where you can press chat, and then you can type your answer right there. So if you're at any point during the process wanting to ask us a question, use Q&A, and we'll answer those at the end. If we are asking you a question, which we will at several points throughout the webinar, then please use that chat function to answer. And we'll be watching those answers come up and sharing some of them with you. So for our first question, just go here. You might have predicted this one because it was in the example. How many siblings do you have? And I'll ask Kathleen to answer first. How many siblings do you have?
I have 2 siblings.
2 siblings. We are getting so many answers. I'm seeing everything from 0 to 6, I think is the most I've seen so far.
I saw a 7.
Oh, you saw a 7. Can anyone beat 7? This is great. So we're seeing a whole range of different siblings. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm seeing all of them. I myself have 3 little brothers. I'm the oldest one of 4. Great. Okay, coming to our next question and using that chat function again to respond. Just come over here. What is the most interesting mode of transportation that you've used? Most interesting mode of transportation. What about you, Kathleen?
So I think the most interesting I've used is probably a bike on what's dubbed the most dangerous road in the world in Bolivia.
I'm seeing bikes, tuk-tuks. We've had 4 camels already, people taking camels around, an elephant, rappelling, foot, a blimp. We've got double bus, scooters, horseback riding on the honeymoon, and they hated it. I love that. ATV, hot air balloon, zip line, Lime in Paris, skydiving. Very exciting.
Lots of adventurers.
Lots of adventures.
In this class today.
Piggybacking up several flights of stairs to a cafe when my foot was broken. Very nice. A strong group of adventurers gathered here today.
A submarine.
Submarine, wonderful. All right, let's go to our next question. These are great, great forms of transportation. What's the strangest job you've ever had? Kathleen, what's the strangest job?
I think my strangest job was on a marketing tour for National Geographic, where I was part of this big display in a truck that parked at Circuit City. And then, remember Circuit City? And then shoppers could come into the truck and look at some things to promote National Geographic and digital cameras. And it was like road rules. We were on the road for 6 weeks.
That's great. I love that. We've got good ones coming in. Retail store detective. We know some of those. Delivering yellow pages, answering calls for TV evangelist. Evangelist, thank you. I always have trouble with that word. Getting beat up by the New Zealand military police. Testing flavors of potato chips. Ooh. That's a real job. That's great. Let's see.
I saw Biscuit Girl.
Biscuit Girl. Renaissance Festival trash collector using elephant poop pickup. Teaching middle school. That's always interesting. Let's see. We've got a whole bunch of them coming in.
Working in education during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, that's very interesting.
That is a strange job.
Yeah. Let's see. Asking people in which hand the Statue of Liberty holds her torch to sell discount books. I'm not sure if I can answer that. That's great. Human poop pickup. A few poop-related jobs. That's always good. Great. All right, let's go to our last question. What unusual hobby have you had, either past or present? What unusual hobby have you had?
You want me to answer? So I had a short stint doing live painting at live music events here in Longmont, and that was a really fun and exciting hobby.
That's a great one. Okay, we've got stamp collecting, playing guitar, Thai boxing, collecting pencil points, making hula hoops, collecting toy cars as a kid, basket weaving, storytelling, adult ballet, life drawing model, hula hooping as exercise, a few different uses of hula hoops, great. Programming old computers. We've got collecting bouncy balls, belly dancing, camper renovations, all sorts of really great hobbies. So we have a very interesting, exciting group gathered here today. Thank you all so much for sharing those answers. Someone's just named restorative justice as a hobby. That's a good one.
You like that hobby?
We share that hobby as well.
We want to do that hobby with you.
Yes. Forest bathing as well. So hopefully you get a sense of how these questions kind of unearth really interesting information about people and give a chance, similar to the connection circle, but even quicker, to build some relationships quickly in the group, find some points of commonality. You know, there was a lot of strange jobs involving poop. You know, that's a point of commonality right there. Or just different ways of finding connection with each other. And generally in this game, as we progress, the questions will get deeper and ask for an increasing level of vulnerability and kind of build on that relationship that is being created in the group. So we encourage you to check out how that game works in real life through reading the instructions for it and trying it out in your community. But thank you so much for doing this modified webinar version with us. It's really wonderful to meet you all through those questions.
And one note we want to make about playing that game, when we play it in person, we're really intentional about increasing the sort of risk level of the questions as we go. We couldn't do that so effectively on this platform because we wouldn't be able to keep up probably with your answers because they would require a longer response. But that's one way of moving participants into this level of connection that ultimately we would probably be going in a restorative learning space. So you can read more about that across the board with all of our games, sort of increasing the challenge level as you progress. Okay, so now we wanted to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, our story, and how we came to write this book. So you learned in the beginning during our bios that Lindsey and I did have a period of time working together at Longmont Community Justice Partnership, or LCJP. That is a nonprofit in Longmont, Colorado, located about an hour north of Denver in the foothills of the Rockies. And we provide restorative justice services in the community in partnership with police. So police can refer criminal cases involving misdemeanor and felony level charges for juveniles and adults to LCJP in lieu of writing a ticket or making an arrest. And then we rely on community volunteers to facilitate the restorative justice process that brings together the responsible and harmed parties with the police officer who referred the case and volunteer community representatives. So at the time that Lindsey and I were working together along with Haley Farah, who is the third author on this book, we were really curious about how to up our game in the training realm because we had a lot of volunteers who had sort of reached a certain level of skill development and were hungry for more. So as staff, often if we got a particularly high stakes or high needs case, we were choosing to facilitate that as staff instead of handing it off to our volunteer facilitators. And we realized that it was our responsibility actually to offer skills development and training to volunteers to increase their skill level, because they were really excited about taking on some of those more difficult cases. So we were really fortunate at the time to come together at LCJP and develop a training team that also included Laura Snyder, who was running our schools-based program at the time. So she was training student teams, student restorative justice teams at the high school and middle school levels. And she was sort of the genius behind developing a lot of experiential activities and games-based learning, which worked so well with youth, but we realized it turns out adults also learn really well when they're invited into this experiential space. So there was a group of us at LCJP that just looked at our training needs and identified what skills we wanted to work on, and then got really creative about how to address those needs through more experiential and games-based learning. After we had tried things out for a while at LCJP, we sort of took it on the road and began presenting these games at conferences. And we were just floored by the response that we got. You know, often when we're in the conference setting, there's a lot of sort of lecture format, a lot of PowerPoint presentations. And so when we invited people into this space to play games with each other and have this opportunity to actually connect as they were learning the skills and have a restorative experience, we would have people sort of abuzz for the rest of the conference, coming up to us and reflecting back how much they were excited to try to bring these games back to their communities and sort of transfer the tools that we had offered and build on them from there. So after getting such a positive response, we realized this is a widespread need in this field. People are looking for more creative and innovative ways of training people and teaching people to do this work that's not in sort of this lecture mode. So after Lindsey and Haley both left LCJP because they got Fulbright fellowships to go to New Zealand, and I stayed here in Longmont, they continued using these training approaches where they were at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. And I continued using these approaches here in Longmont. And so a few years later, we continued talking about what we were up to and realized, like, hey, let's combine our experiences. Now we've worked with a number of different contexts and different learners in different communities. And so we think we have something really strong to write about so that we can make these tools more accessible for people all over the world.
Yes. So where we want to start today in terms of kind of the content of this webinar is reflecting on this idea of what does a restorative pedagogy look like Kathy introduced at the beginning. What is a restorative approach to teaching? How can the how be just as important as the what? And this is a conversation that many people are having in the field right now, talking about how can we take that restorative philosophy, that restorative approach, and bring it from our programs and our process facilitation into every other area of our lives, into the classroom, into how we teach, into how we train, and then how we work, how we are with our families. And I would say that's a big part of where the movement is right now, is how can we bring restorative into all these different spaces. And so these kind of central questions are at the root of both the book and what we're talking about today, of how should restorative practices be taught across contexts, and what teaching structures and methods are appropriate in forming that restorative pedagogy. How can that be in greater alignment with restorative values? So if we think about what's called the transmission model, which is that kind of classic model of teaching that you see in classrooms or training spaces. The way that this is talked about is students are like empty vessels, and the teacher is pouring the knowledge like water into those empty vessels. And so within that idea, there's a lot being communicated. The teacher is the one who knows all the right answers and is just communicating those to students who are kind of soaking it up. And There's a few problems with that from the framework of a restorative philosophy, from the restorative lens. The first is that there's a hierarchy inherent in that sort of teaching relationship. It's creating space for the teacher's voice to be heard and to be acknowledged above the rest of the students, the rest of the class, the rest of the community gathered in that space. So it kind of runs counter to the equalizing impact of restorative processes. It encourages often a passive role for students, so they're receiving that water but aren't necessarily thinking about how this relates to their own experiences and prior knowledge, or bringing what they know to share with the class, or challenging their preconceived notions, or challenging the material in the course based on something that they've experienced. It's much more of a passive role often. And then there's little opportunity, because of that passive role, for students and the teacher to be learning from each other, for there to be that collaboration and sharing of experiences and perspectives. And so it falls short in terms of meeting our restorative values and what we're trying to bring into these teaching spaces. And I would just add that even when it's done more experientially, when there's activities brought in, when maybe there's conversations, if there's still that hierarchy, if there's still the sense that there's a person who's the teacher who is right and has the right answers, and there's the students who are learning those right answers, then it still has these kind of issues in terms of that alignment with restorative values. So what I think is interesting also to notice is the similarities between this kind of classic classroom environment and the court process. You can see in just the structure of these spaces and the power relationship communicated by that physical structure, quite a bit of similarity. So there is a teacher or a judge who is at the front and is elevated either by a raised platform or by being the only person standing. That person is really running the space, deciding who gets to speak for how long, who has the opportunity to share their perspective. All the communication is really directed towards that authority figure rather than necessarily having as much pure interaction. And that kind of structure is non-verbally reinforcing that relationship of power. Not to say that they're exactly alike, but it is interesting because the court process is often one that we see as trying to subvert through having the circle of chairs in the restorative process. So just thinking, how can we on a structural level also be breaking down the power inherent in the structure of the classroom space. So we're going to move into a model here for understanding what a restorative classroom environment looks like. But in order for us to talk about that model, we would like to hear some reflections from you. So this first reflection, if you can write in that chat box again, briefly, reflecting on your worst learning experience and what made it the worst. So maybe this is a classroom, maybe it's a training. What was a time that it just really didn't feel good? It wasn't working for you. And what was it about that training time or classroom time that made it the worst? And we'll have Kathleen share while we're getting some responses, if that's okay.
Yeah, so the thing I think of as my worst learning experience was actually in an employment space, the workplace, where I had a supervisor who I always hope and expect to learn from a supervisor in a workplace. I had a supervisor who didn't relate to the fact that we as nonprofit employees who had a lot of requirements outside of normal 9-to-5 work hours would really benefit from having some flex time. And so she had come from a corporate environment where there was this concept of like, once you are salaried, you work as many hours as necessary to get your job done, and that could be 60 or 70 hours per week. It doesn't matter. There's no opportunity to flex off. And so for me, it was a very distressing experience overall on many levels, but in part, I would consider it a learning experience because I realized that my supervisor didn't actually relate or understand the work that we were doing. And also there was really no space to have a conversation about it. She was sort of in this role of like, this is the policy and there's no room for change.
Thank you. I've been seeing some common themes in the answers that are coming in. A lot of people talking about lecture-themed classes with no interaction, feeling like a teacher or a trainer wanted people to fail or was yelling or making people cry, kind of that lack of positive relationship, using fully textbooks, not relating to real life.
A teacher who wanted to build self-confidence, so they let kids to the front of the room and then criticized them.
Yep.
So not, someone else I saw wrote, not a teacher not using the strategies that they were actually teaching, so incongruence there.
Definitely. Someone's talking about the method of instruction feeling dehumanizing, mocking of students when they make a mistake. So lots of different challenges and some negative experiences of in the classroom space. So I want to take those experiences into this model that we're going to look at. This comes from an article that Christina Llewellyn and Christina Parker, the Christinas, wrote, where they're talking about different types of classroom environment and wrestling with this question of how can we really have a restorative classroom environment. They describe these 4 different combinations of controlled or close relationship and minimizing or maximizing conflict dialogue, which I'm going to explain in a moment. But they don't actually put it into a visual like this. This is just me putting that into a visual to help us talk about those different combinations. But I think they really hit on something that is illustrated by these examples that are coming forward. So controlled relationships, meaning that kind of top down, that lecture style, real division of power, teacher's voice above all others. Close relationships being a chance to learn from each other, a sense of equal voice in the classroom space, of valuing each other's perspectives and experiences. This term conflict dialogue that they use refers to dialogue that fosters critical reflection on social issues. So to what degree is the classroom creating space to talk about the things that really matter, that are really important? So that can either be minimized or maximized. So in these examples coming through from you all of these learning experiences that have felt not great, have felt like the worst, I'm hearing a lot of controlled relationship, dehumanizing, the yelling, making people cry, wanting you to fail. That power is being exercised in a way that feels not good. And I'm also hearing, you know, that there wasn't really a chance to have your voice heard, to have the voices of the students in the class heard, and for that positive conflict dialogue that allows us to learn deeply from each other to take place. And, you know, I'm also hearing examples where maybe the teacher wanted there to be conflict dialogue and was trying to, you know, someone mentioned that building of confidence. So having them come up and talk about something, but not first building the close relationship, the trust, the safety that would make that conflict dialogue actually feel productive. I think many of us have been in classroom or training spaces where they're trying to get us to talk about something really important, but we don't know each other yet, and there's not that trust and safety, and so you end up walking away with feelings of shame or misunderstanding, and you know, those relationships end up kind of being further fragmented through trying to jump into the deep end before that trust is built. So thank you so much. I think those examples that you all have given really help to make where one of these dynamics falls over come to life. So now we'd like to hear about your best. What has been the best learning experience? What really made it the best?
So I go right to my high school art teacher, Harry Douglas. I hope that he will watch this webinar so he can hear this response. I was really into art throughout school, including university, and I feel like throughout my whole formal school experience, Harry Douglas made more effort to get to know me than probably any other teacher that I ever had. And thinking about how I knew him between the ages of 14 and 18, it was a really huge time to be seen by an adult. And one of the things that I think about in terms of this, being in an environment where we want people to take risks, in my art classes in high school, we would do group critiques. So we would put our work up on the wall and get to say whatever we wanted about each other's work, which was, a huge leap of risk taking. And I think for me personally, the reason I was able to manage that was because I trusted Mr. Douglas to facilitate that environment in a way that was safe enough and brave enough and manageable, so that students wouldn't totally collapse if they were criticized or, got feedback that was hard to handle.
Great, great. And I think we're seeing a lot of similar themes coming through in the responses. I also just want to acknowledge that thank you all for sharing your wonderful stories. We of course won't be able to read all of them as they come up, but thank you for everything that you're sharing. So I'm seeing, similar to your story, a sense of a teacher getting to know you, offering kind of gentle guidance and showing interest and engagement. A few people have talked about students becoming the teachers in a class and how powerful that can be. A sense of being listened to, a sense that the entire group that's involved in the class or training is really passionate and engaged and is showing up for the conversation. That kind of inspirational piece, feeling really valued as a person, as the perspectives and experiences that you bring. So, and a relation to real life has been coming up quite a bit. To what degree were the topics, the skills then brought into real life applications? So if we go back to that model again, just because I find it to be a helpful tool in considering these two essential pieces, definitely close relationships is the #1 thing that is coming through in your responses. So a teacher who showed that they cared, that was engaged, that wanted to get to know the students as people, and then even more than that, created a space where students could get to know each other and get to know the teacher as a person, where that kind of close relationship was happening in all directions. That seems to be the biggest piece coming through. Now, I think that oftentimes, actually, the risk in a restorative justice classroom or training space is that we're really good at this close relationship piece, and we spend lots of time doing connection circles or having different conversations that allow us to know each other, and we leave feeling really warm and fuzzy and feeling like this was amazing, but we don't always have that conflict dialogue being maximized as well, where we're diving into the important issues in the field and considering, what are some of the shortcomings, what are the ways that restorative practices need to grow in order to really meet their aim. So finding classroom spaces that can do both, that can have that close relationship and then also encourage that important conversation about real issues that can lead to wider societal change.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks so much again for sending in your responses. This is our effort at making this webinar as interactive as possible while still respecting all that we need to do around social distancing.
Definitely, yeah. So thank you for those responses. And just to highlight some of these takeaways around restorative pedagogy, being one that builds relationships, encourages respectful conversation about important issues, that teacher more as a facilitator and who's learning alongside the students rather than that power dynamic, relying on experiential learning that helps us bring what's being discussed into real life and creates opportunity and constantly reinforces equal voice.
One of the common themes I'm seeing that comes up throughout our book too is this idea that in a learning environment, we can treat each other like real humans and try to engage with each other as holistic beings. So not expecting either the teacher or the students to show up in just one certain way and perform in one certain way, but acknowledging to the greatest extent possible that we all have different backgrounds and experiences that we can never fully understand about each other, but we can invite participation and invite equal voice into the classroom to do our best to express ourselves and begin some authentic connecting, and that really enriches the learning experience and brings the restorative values alive in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so we have a fair amount of material devoted to the book about how to actually deliver this material. So as you've heard a few times, it's not just about what you're teaching, it's how you're teaching or presenting it. And I want to make a note that we're talking a lot in this realm about teaching and training in restorative practices. And so we use the terms facilitator, teacher, trainer interchangeably because we imagine that restorative practitioners identify in all of those different ways. We also imagine that many of you might actually be classroom teachers, but some of you might never step into what you consider a formal classroom. And that being said, much of this material is really applicable across contexts. In any environment where you're trying to facilitate relationship building, communication skills, community resilience, these methods and approaches that we talk about in this book are very applicable and very relevant. So we try to use universally accessible language, and that is to invite and encourage people to think creatively about where they could really use these tools. Like even in your family, you could use some of these games maybe to get people together over the family holidays when there's a lot of conflict, maybe build relationships first, right? Like there's a lot of ways to get creative about how to use this material. So the need to know yourself and the need to know your learners. These are the two main themes falling under preparing to facilitate. And so in terms of knowing yourself, we talk a lot about self-reflection. So thinking about not just about like the download, that transition model that Lindsey referenced of I have certain amount of content or material to teach and I'm just going to teach it as though it exists completely separate from me. Rather thinking relationally, like how do I relate to this material? How is it playing a role in my life, especially if we're working in the realm of restorative justice and restorative practices, if we're talking about crime or conflict or discipline. What's my past relationship? What are my opinions or my biases about the judicial system, about people who have been victims of crime or have perpetrated crime? What am I bringing to the classroom? And really being intentional about thinking that through. And then connecting that to when I get in front of students or learners, how am I going to relate my own experience to the experience that I'm hoping to provide to them? And what that requires is being authentic and being congruent with who you are and your true relationship to the material, like especially if you're doing this work like Lindsey and I are doing right now, asking people to share vulnerably, and often some of our games can get into some pretty sensitive topics. It's really important to be prepared as a facilitator or trainer to think about how am I going to react if I get triggered, or if I have judgment or evaluation that comes up naturally because that happens. How am I going to manage that in front of learners? The more authentic you can be in your presentation, the more you will invite learners to do the same. And that is a way to generate trust in the learning environment and to really, as I was saying before, to invite people to show up with their full story. So not kind of thinking like, well, I have to hide this or shelter this part of myself. In the restorative realm, we're asking people to share authentically about their experience. So we need to be able to do the same as the practitioners hoping to create that brave space. I mentioned the brave space here in the slides on page 49. There's some really, really excellent ground rules that have been developed. In recent years, we've shifted away from the term safe space to brave space. So there's some great references in the book if you would like to learn about that and some norms and ground rules to follow. And then we also referenced 3 very practical tools that you can refer to in order to sort of guide you and foster this process of self-reflection. The mindful pause, there's a whole description that we took from Annie O'Shaughnessy, which helps sort of helps you to develop a sort of strategy for how you can take a mindful pause before reacting, especially when something has put you sort of in the hot seat or gotten under your skin, or something that's made you uncomfortable as a facilitator. And then we have 2 tools that were developed by Barb Taves, who also is the beloved editor of our book, a self-evaluation tool and a self-reflection tool that give you step-by-step questions that you can follow that help guide either an individual or a training team to look back at how their delivery of material has gone and where they might want to improve, and especially like looking at those personal aspects of how we related to the material. Okay, so we're curious about what you do to prepare, to facilitate. And just to be clear, this could be whether it's you're going to facilitate a restorative justice process, or you're facilitating or teaching and training. What are some of the measures that you take? And Lindsey's going to help me track the chat responses come in like rapid fire. So she's helping keep an eye on things. Oh, okay. And some examples to maybe guide you. These are some of the things that Lindsey and I do. So Lindsey actually was my great teacher in how important it was to be deliberate before facilitating a restorative justice conference. And one of Lindsey's key strategies is time in nature. So she was really good about taking a break between the end of the workday and the start time of when she was going to facilitate, and spending time outside. I have this picture of myself practicing Qigong, which is a movement meditation form similar to Tai Chi. That's something that I've done regularly for about 8 years. So it's sort of just ingrained in me, and something that I can call on both before facilitating and in the moment. It works with both physical movement and breath and visualization. So it's sort of always available to me. This picture, the bottom that shows me laughing hysterically, is with my coworker, Jessica Goldberg, who's our volunteer and training coordinator here at LCJP. And this was actually a conference where we were teaching others some of the games that are in the book. And I really enjoy this picture because it reflects the importance of having good connection and right relationship with whoever your co-trainer is. And so one way to prepare may be to check in with your co-trainer, make sure you're sort of on the same page and ready to go, see if there's anything anybody needs to vent about, so that when you show up and present, you can sort of present with a shared presence and spirit, going back to, you know, how the affect that you want to bring to the material you're teaching. And last, I threw in this picture of a cup of coffee because I wanted to make sure that, you know, if you don't really relate to being in nature, you don't want to meditate, it's really not what you do, it's the intention that you bring to it. So maybe even just taking a break and having a hot beverage. For me, it would be coffee. For Lindsey, it would be tea. All are welcome. And just using that as a moment to sort of center and get ready before you bring yourself into the teaching and training space.
Great. And there's lots of really great examples of how you all prepare coming through in the chat. I thought it was interesting, though, the first response was not enough, which is kind of telling. I think that probably many of us feel that way. Things get in a rush, and you're running from one thing to next, and so it often does feel like not enough. Other ideas, we have yoga, meditation, self-reflection, centering, grounding, and attuning, reviewing the information about, you know, the course or the facilitation. I do that as well. Praying, playing through the facilitation in your mind, so visualizing, different mindfulness techniques, anything that connects to the body and helps relax. emotional check-ins, we had coffee, we had spending time with your pets, resting, exercising, building relationship. So there's a lot of really great ideas of how each of you find that moment of preparation in your lives.
Great, thank you. Thanks for those responses. Then the next part of preparing to facilitate that we discuss in the book is the need to know your learners. So we want to recognize that when we're teaching and training restorative pedagogy, we're often challenging a commonly held paradigm, right? Even though we may have chosen to take a course or to step into a volunteer role as a restorative practitioner, many of us are still holding onto this sort of default comfort around a punitive response. And you might notice that, especially if you're bringing together learners for the first time to work on these restorative skills. So it's important to be ready for that and to realize that by asking people to step in and to do experiential work and to bring their voice into the learning experience is going to require some risk. And it's going to ask people to leave behind their former beliefs and assumptions and to consider thinking and approaching and relating to this material differently. So we want people to be able to talk about that inner conflict. We want people to be able to voice it. There's something that I wrote about from Bell Hooks, who says, you know, it's important that, especially in the United States, and I'm sure other cultures and countries around the world, to acknowledge that conflict doesn't have to be negative, that we want to support that conflict dialogue so that people can practice having a voice and being able to engage in dialogue with respect. So as a facilitator, being able to think about what conflicts might come up, what are the diverse experiences that your learners are going to bring to the classroom, and sort of having an idea about how you're going to engage with those diverse experiences, especially if there's differences, if there's expressions of power and privilege in the classroom. How are you going to make sure that the voices of some of your students from marginalized populations are elevated and that they don't feel like they can't participate at risk of challenging the more dominant voices in the classroom? So in all of this, what we're hoping for is to kind of cultivate this optimal learning space, which Dan Siegel talks about and has this great model called his window of tolerance. And so we reference that in the book because it talks about what happens when learners go into hyper or hypo arousal and essentially shut down and aren't able to have a productive learning experience. So it's important to sort of track and note where learners are, where their growing edge is, where they're getting close to the edge of their comfort zone. And it's very artful to bring people close to that edge, asking them to take risks, but not go over the edge to the point where people maybe experience shame, where people are no longer feeling safe to participate. I'm sure people in this webinar have all been in some room, in some place, given your responses, where you felt like there was no real opportunity to really bring your true voice to the learning process. And something that can really help with this artful dance of moving with learners, but not too far, is to work with a training team. So we know that we benefited greatly when we got to work together delivering training, and that's something that we always try to do here at LCJP. If you can engage with either your students, we saw that as students, as teachers, or other individuals who reflect the diversity of your learners and can help you sort of navigate and prepare for where the learning process is going to go, that will equip you to be more prepared and to be able to lean on other instructors, other teachers, so that you can create that space for optimal learners, optimal learning.
Great.
Oh, and I didn't mention my favorite thing, love, humor, and humility. So I just said yes, please, because this work is hard, right? Like working in restorative justice and restorative practices, working as teachers in classrooms, it's challenging, it's demanding. And so as much as possible, how can we show up in a way that demonstrates our love for ourselves, our love for our students, for the whole learning experience? And it's okay to bring humility, to admit that nobody is the expert, the end all be all in this work, and that we want to share making mistakes and be transparent when we could have done something better. And one way to do that is to bring humor into the learning space. So I found that to be a hugely restorative experience for me as a teacher, when I'm able to laugh at myself or be playful with my co-trainers. It helps to also offer that opportunity to learners, that they can realize that it's okay. Just like Kathleen made a mistake, I can take a risk and make a mistake, and we're all going to get through it together. It's not going to be the end of the world, and actually making mistakes creates opportunities for enhanced learning.
Perfect. So we're going to ask for your input again. We thought that with this time, rather than just showing you the games that we already have available on the website, which there's quite a few games in the book, and then there's even more on the website, and we'll show you where to find those at the end. We wanted to kind of show you this process of developing a new game or activity based on a specific need. So what we would like you to do at this point is to take a minute to reflect, and we're just going to be quiet while you have time to think about this, on the needs that you're seeing in your learning community. Is there a certain skill or concept that your learners are struggling a bit to grasp that you would like for them to practice? Is there an issue that you would like to explore with your learners? Reflecting on those needs that you're seeing, and we're going to just take a quiet moment to have some of those responses come through the chat function, and we'll see if there's any commonalities, and we'll kind of pick a need to use for our design process today.
All right, I'll start the minute timer and let you respond.
Great needs.
Probably just a few more seconds. Yeah, it's been a minute.
Great.
This is so helpful. We're gonna have to develop ideas and games and activities for all of these needs, and we would encourage you to do the same, and let us know what you come up with.
Definitely, yeah. These are great needs. Yeah, so many sources of inspiration for further design for all of us. And then also, and we'll mention at the end here, but some of these needs, we do have some games and activities that we use to respond to, so we can help point in the direction of those. Once again, want to mention, we won't obviously get to hit on all of these because there's quite a bit coming in, but thank you all so much for reflecting on these needs. And like Kathleen said, maybe this will be the inspiration for you to design something and then tell us about it. So one thing that came up quite a bit, I saw numerous times, was the kind of vulnerability piece, how to encourage vulnerability. And someone named that as specifically helping people make I statements as a way for them to kind of share their feelings, their needs, their experiences in that vulnerable space. So maybe we'll start with that one and then kind of see how we go working through these needs as they continue to come in. That goes along with affective language, which is coming in as well. So these are the steps that we lay out in the book for this design process to give a general kind of roadmap in undertaking this creative process. The first one is around cultivating that self-reflection, that willingness to learn, which Kathleen has talked quite a bit about already. But in this case, reflecting specifically on your relationship to a topic. So if we're thinking around vulnerability, I statements, sharing kind of impacts on me in a way that is easy for the other party to receive, like that I statement. I might reflect on how I don't always do that well in my personal relationships at all. I might reflect on to what degree these different models of communication are valued in different cultures, and how my own cultural background might make me consider one form of communicating better than another, and to what degree can I help kind of break that down with myself. Thinking about my history, my assumptions, what's happening in my life right now that might be presenting a charge around this question. And then just entering the teaching process with that willingness to learn, to be also a learner while facilitating this experience. So we've done the second piece of identifying a need. So then our companion learning objective would be, learners will practice being vulnerable and using I statements to share how they are impacted. So then we have that kind of as our end goal for the process. So then step 3 is where it gets fun. We have to start thinking about what are the models, what are the metaphors, what are the tools that we might be familiar with that could give us creative material in this design process. So what are tools that come to mind for this?
Yeah, what we want is to make sure that we give people the opportunity to practice actually forming those I statements. So we have everybody actually doing that on the spot, and then making sure that there's a space for dialogue once those I statements have been formed, so that people can take a risk and go there. Maybe we don't start somewhere super vulnerable, but we build up to a place where people are taking a greater risk and vulnerability. And then as facilitators, managing some sort of dialogue to debrief what that was like. But I'm thinking the main element that we want here is for people to have that embodied experience, really. Like a lot of people are talking about embodied practice. So how can I practice what it feels like to speak from the I and put that out there into the world, and not try to couch it in some sort of advice or lecture or all of the other habits that we see people doing.
So one model that comes to mind for me around that vulnerable sharing and the I statement is nonviolent communication, which focuses, on identifying especially feelings and needs. And I just got for a Christmas present, actually, these GROK cards, G-R-O-K, which I highly recommend, that are a collection of feelings, words, and need words, and are really fun to play with and great for your interpersonal communication needs as well. So I'm just thinking nonviolent communication would be an example of a model or a tool that we could employ in an activity to give that experience of what does it feel like to name what I'm feeling, what I'm needing with that I statement language.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. I know there's a lot of practitioners in the restorative field who have some experience with nonviolent communication, and we've tried to sort of borrow or dip into that, utilize the resource of NVC within the restorative realm. So this might be one way to tap in, like you're saying, tap into another tool and model that people already have some familiarity with, but also maybe we can figure out a way for people to utilize it without being NVC experts.
Definitely, yeah, but kind of that idea of feeling and needs.
Yeah.
So so if we have like this idea of a model or something that we can use in that design process, we're then thinking about how are we designing the experience? What will the learners be asked to do, essentially? What's the tone, the pace, the connection to real world? So just thinking of the grok cards is making me think of that game Apples to Apples, which for those who maybe aren't familiar, Apples to Apples, you get, there's one person who's kind of the game leader who has, I think it's an adjective card, and then everyone else has a collection of nouns or other cards that they're trying to match to the adjective. So the leader of the game throws out one card, and then you're looking as players in your cards to see which one matches the best and putting it down on the table. So I'm wondering with those grok cards about the potential for a small groups to take turn where a leader is sharing one sentence on something that's happening in their life, and the other players in the game have a collection of feelings and a collection of needs, and they're trying to identify what is the feeling and need that might be resonating with this person's experience, and throwing in their combination of feeling and need. And then just like in Apples to Apples, the person who's kind of leading the round then says those. So I feel scared because I need security, and reads out all of the combinations and then determines which one is closest to how they're feeling and what they're needing, and that person gets a point.
Yeah, the person wins something.
That person wins something.
Yeah, a little healthy competition over her.
A little healthy.
Yeah, I like that. We could even, I know some of those games that are like Apples to Apples also include like a competitive element where you can advocate for what you put down as your cards, your feeling and needs. So you could try to compel the others why yours is the best fit, which would maybe create some interesting dialogue, because if you have a sentence about like, this thing in my life is really hard for me, I might relate to that with certain feelings and needs that are different than the feelings and needs that you do or that someone else in the group does. So we could actually have an interesting conversation about why your sentence brought up fear and security. Whereas for me, it brought up loneliness and a need for companionship or something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of another layer of learning related to restorative practices too, because the first question is what happened. Right. And so you're hearing this description, but you're not hearing the impacts yet. But as learner, you might be imagining certain impacts that may or may not resonate with what is actually real for the speaker. So just having a chance to pull that apart a bit as a group to understand how people could have different feelings and needs arising in similar experiences could be interesting.
Yeah, and I'm thinking if in order to try to start the game at a place where maybe, people aren't quite ready to go into such risky territory, you could have some established sentences that someone could read even if it wasn't personally meaningful to them, but then you could open it up eventually for people to just make a statement about something true and personal to them, which would also invite that practicing being vulnerable and practicing being authentic, and that I think also has the opportunity of reminding everybody that in all of our different experiences and our ways of being human in the world, that we actually have a lot of shared human needs and human emotions, and so we can cultivate some degree of like connection and community building through the game also.
Definitely, yeah. And regarding kind of tone, when we get to that point of people sharing something that's real to their current experience, it wouldn't have to all be difficult things. Like I think there's a tendency in this sort of activity for people to go right to what's really hard right now, but having somebody share something really exciting that just happened because there's feelings and needs related to joy and kind of the whole positive range of emotion as well. And I think that that can help to kind of balance an activity and you know, keep it from getting kind of too heavy for people to still engage with as a learning. So maybe that would come down to facilitators modeling as well. You know, if we were both playing the game, one of us could model something that's really difficult, one could model something that's brought a lot of joy recently, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
We can play.
We need to test it.
We can definitely,
Who wants to come play games with us? Because this is the next step, right?
Yeah. So the next step, first we should mention designing the debrief, which we've touched on a little bit, you know, some of what you would want to create space for the group to reflect on. But what are the open-ended questions that will help people to speak to their experience in the activity and kind of encourage that meaningful conversation, that conflict dialogue? So I'm just thinking, you know, what was it like for you to, you know, share vulnerably in the crowd, or to put your feeling and need into that I statement format? What did that feel like? Did you learn anything about your own experience through doing that? It's also a way to like integrate the new understanding or skills during the debrief for that to really land for people. So, you know, how did it impact you as a listener to be listening for feelings and needs? How did that change how you were relating to the speaker?
Yeah, what kind of questions came up? You know, like if we were really building off of this, like Lindsey was saying about when we're collecting the story, gathering harms, you know, what kinds of questions generated out of the game while you were in the moment? What did you want to learn more about? Definitely, yeah. Yeah, so these could be some of the debrief questions, and those are refined with each delivery, you know, which questions help to really open things up, which ones, you know, maybe fell flat. So then the final step is to play the game, to see how it goes, which, you know, of course we would have to do with this to test it, to see what worked well, what did people really like and engage with, to receive that feedback from the learning group, what could be better, what could improve it, and to take time, particularly it's best when you can facilitate in at least pairs, so that you can have that time of conversation really intentionally set aside after the training, you know, maybe a day after or so, to sit down and say, hey, we tried this new game. How did it go? What went really well? What do we need to work on and improve next time? Yeah, that piece of debriefing, especially as a training team, has just been invaluable for me and Lindsey as trainers. I know, because a game is very often not perfect the first time that we play it, and we thank our learners for giving it a shot and then bring it back again with some tweaks and improvements. And it can acknowledge, even in that sense, that, you know, we tried something and we're gonna try to make it better next time. And that's part of the modeling vulnerability, I guess. Definitely. Yeah. I don't know how this is gonna go, we just can't stop. Are you willing to try it with us? So some of the other needs I just want to mention, we don't really have time to design another one, but people, you know, having a chance to practice how to repair their own relationship. So that kind of restorative conversation for a one-on-one dialogue when you're one of the parties. I want to mention we have a game on the website called the Social Discipline Window Shuffle that we often, depending on the scenarios that we put into that game, can be used to teach restorative conversation model and to practice that. We use that a lot in kind of workplace conflict spaces. How to be kind of culturally competent. A few things came through with that kind of cultural piece, which is huge. And that's an area that we're really working to try to develop more games, is how can we, you know, have more games that kind of, you know, create intentionally space for cultural difference, and then also
in addition to that, look at kind of structural roots of crime and conflict, kind of the bigger picture. So you can find some of those on the website as well. Another piece with that, though, and we talk about this in the book, is just the way in which you're delivering the training being one so that you can be receiving feedback real time, so that you can make mistakes and your learners can call you on things, and that can become a learning for the group, and you can improve and have that kind of humility real time to acknowledge and take responsibility for mistakes made. Some of the other things, understanding kind of the punitive versus restorative framework. We have a few games for that on the website, involving skits and questions, lots of different things, naming things that are going unsaid in a group. So something that's kind of under the surface and isn't being named. I'm thinking, you know, just like the elephant in the middle of the room. So not to go through this whole design process again, but that's a metaphor that I would want to use. You know, can we have kind of a giant cutout elephant that is somehow being engaged with in a game-like manner? Because sometimes those symbols can do a lot to get across the point of what we're trying to teach. So thank you all for those needs. I'm really excited to go back through and write all those down, because as I was reading, and there were even more than I touched on, but they were certainly resonating with my experiences as well, and I think yours as well. And so we'll be excited to do more design work and to hear of any games that you end up designing based on those needs.
Yeah, please tell us about your experiences, and maybe we can all collaborate on some game development based on our common needs. I wanted to just tack on at the beginning of chapter 8, where we actually provide instructions to a number of games. We have these 3 universal guidelines. And those guidelines are, one, a lot of the games have space for you to add rules to make the challenge level increase as you play. So wherever you're at, if you've ever played a game before, if the game is boring, nobody's going to want to play it, right? If it's like, that's kind of people's, I think, issue with a lot of like icebreaker type games. It doesn't seem to have any purpose or land any point. So we encourage you to add rules increasingly to make the game harder. And my personal experience is that I've had to be more on point with adding rules when I'm training youth than with adults, because youth are so fast in their learning curve. And it makes it really fun and challenging, and certainly engaging young learners. What should a new rule be is a great way to go about that, get ideas from them. The second guideline is exactly that: incorporate learners in the design and facilitation of the game. And I saw a comment come in from somebody about how there's already so much competition in the classroom. I'm guessing you mean like in the school classroom already, that you don't want to sort of fuel that fire and engender more competition. So one way I would think about trying to manage that is getting some of your students to help you about how could we play this game in a way that's bringing people together and encouraging more people to get to know each other and connect, and not pushing each other apart, and sort of leaning on your student champions to help you with that. Third, making the games inclusive. So some of these games involve physical movement, or being able to, most of them involve being able to listen, being able to listen audio or visually. And so if you have learners with different ability levels, please think about that in advance and make adjustments to, you know, how could I, if there's a lot of verbal communication in this game, how could I switch it to making things be visual cues so that all learners can participate? Most of these games can be adapted so that everybody can participate. And we just want to acknowledge that that's an important piece of being equitable and inclusive in the learning environment. So we have 16 minutes left. So I'm going to quickly go through this slide, and want to make sure that we have enough time to just walk you through our website and also do some Q&A at the end. So one chapter builds from how to build a game or activity, and then we take it one step further, how to design a training or a class. So however long your session is going to be, whether it's 2 hours or a full day, training. I won't go into great detail around this, but some of the things that we have really enjoyed doing with experiential learning is creating an arc to the day. So being really intentional at the beginning of the day about bringing people together, often through See Ya, the game that we played at the beginning, makes everybody laugh, helps people relax. And then as we build and go through some instruction, will increase the risk level, increase what we're asking people to do in terms of that vulnerability piece, until we hit sort of this peak at the middle of the day, and then we'll aim to close the day with an activity that synthesizes learning, also fosters connection, and supports people in leaving the training experience with a sense of hope and a positive experience. We really don't want to send people out into the world feeling heavy and sort of hopeless or feeling isolated. So that's an arc that we try to follow. And then I'll just also mention specifically that piece about reviewing and improving the overall experience is something that can't be stated enough. Doing that as a training team. And if you're teaching or training alone, if you can reach out to a friend or another professional and just talk through your experience with them and ask for their feedback, you know, some other trusted person in your life, or even learners from your community, so that you can get feedback on the experience and feel more confident about your next delivery.
Along that line, I find it really helpful to just make the commitment to never deliver the exact same class or training twice. There's always something that can be adjusted or improved or replaced, and having that commitment then pushes to, okay, no, this is an important part of the process. It's not done when the class is done. It's still time for reflection and to think about what will be done a bit differently next time.
And I just realized I added this picture. I asked Lindsey's permission first. This picture on this slide I added because this was a training, a facilitator training Lindsey and I delivered together at LCJP, where the way that I introduced us at the beginning of the training did not fully respect and honor Lindsey's contribution to the development and the leadership of the training. We went through the whole 16 hours together, and I had no idea that I had actually really hurt and harmed her from the way that I introduced us in the very beginning. And so when we met to debrief the training, the very first thing she said to me was, can we have a restorative conversation? And you know, I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I had no idea what I had done. And I was so terrified that I had hurt Lindsey and not realized it. And she talked through exactly what had happened and how it had impacted her. We used a restorative conversation model. And that was so crucial for my own learning, both because we needed to repair that relationship and make sure that when we went into the next training, Lindsey wouldn't be sort of anticipating that I might do the same thing again unknowingly, and also became a great learning experience for me, just as a human being, but also as a teacher, so that I wouldn't replicate the same mistake that I made, which in part was done because I hadn't taken time to prepare that morning and was sort of in a spin and just rolled right into the training without pausing.
Which none of that is easy to do. I just want to acknowledge, you know, either side, like that conversation went really well because Kathleen was fully immediately willing to hear it. I had to make the decision that I wasn't going to just try to let it go, because, you know, honestly, I knew that she didn't mean for there to be any harm caused. We're, you know, close friends. We've worked together a long time, but it was sitting heavily with me a couple days after the training, and so making that decision to have an experience of repair so that it's not kind of sitting under the surface moving forward. But that's not easy to do, but is another example of bringing the work into life and into the teaching experience. So thanks for being a great restorative conversation partner. So wanting to just show you the website real quick, and then we'll move into Q&A. So we're just gonna switch over. Where did it go?
We do stop share over
there it is. Okay, thank you. Okay.
And then, yeah.
Great. So this is restorativeteachingtools.com, the website that has been developed as a companion to the book, because when we were putting the book together, we had way more games and activities than they would let us fit in the little book, because they have to be little books. And so this is a space for us to share more games and to continue to share work and to communicate, hopefully, with you all moving forward. So if you come to this website, you'll see right at the beginning here a place to explore the games. If you click there, you'll see that the games are divided into 3 categories. So games for building relationships, games for building understanding, so understanding of the restorative philosophy and approach to conflict and wrongdoing, and then games for building skills. So if you pick one of those categories, you'll then find a page that this one, for example, is divided into different skills. So the first category of skills is asking good, open-ended, affective questions. And we have a few different activities for that. So there'll be a short description, and then you can click to download the PDF that will give you a full description of how to play each game. It's easy to print, and for those that have materials, you'll find materials attached to the PDF as well after the instructions. So, creative ideas to repair harm, reflective statements, reframing, understanding needs. There's a lot of different kind of skill needs, and same in those other categories of games. Also, just wanted to show you on this website, there's a space for you to sign up to receive the game of the month. And so we'll be sending out a new game or activity each month. And we have so many ideas based on needs now of things that need to be developed. And so you can put your email in here if you would like to continue to receive new material in your inbox each month. There's also a space for us to share news. So you can kind of follow us that way. There's about us and a space to contact us. And then also just want to highlight this information about our upcoming course. We're offering a Restorative Teaching Tools summer training this coming August at Sunrise Ranch, which that is a real photo of what Sunrise Ranch looks like. It's an incredibly beautiful space. And this workshop is going to be teaching you how to teach restorative practices in this way. So we'll be using a lot of the games and activities, helping you learn how to facilitate them and build comfort with that, and then also doing a lot of workshopping around designing your own games and activities based on your needs, and kind of diving into this question of what does a restorative pedagogy look like? How can we teach and hold classroom space in a way that's in greater alignment with restorative values? So we would love to have you sign up and join us this summer. We do also want to acknowledge that there's some uncertainty in the world right now in terms of when travel and this sort of gathering is going to be possible again. So if you do sign up and we have to reschedule, we can either move your deposit towards that future training date or refund it. So just know that we're aware of that possibility of change.
And hosting at Sunrise Ranch allows us to make it really like a retreat. So we're really going to try to live out those restorative values and a restorative experience, and invite people to really do some self-care while they're taking this course with us, and relax and enjoy some love and humor and humility as we practice learning and teaching in this way.
Great. All right. So that is all that we had, so we can open to Q&A now. I'm just going to take us to our final slide, but thank you all so much for your participation throughout this webinar. It's been really wonderful to get to interact with you all in this way.
Thank you all so very much. I took pages and pages of notes. I'm so excited to read the book, and I can't wait. There are some questions that are starting to trickle in. One of them is specific to the context, and you mentioned this for the retreat, but do you have specific games or tools to aid facilitators in running online or virtual games and activities throughout this quarantine season?
It's such a great question. Just thinking about that and talking about that in the last couple of days as we prepared for this webinar, and that was coinciding with everything that's happening and that shift in teaching. We don't have a lot right now, but I definitely see that as a big need area for further development. There are a number of our activities that could be easily adapted, but most of them are written envisioning an in-person learning environment.
Yeah, I think one of the trickiest things is that many of the games rely on grouping people together in some sort of team. And that's something that we haven't quite conquered with the virtual barrier.
Great, thank you. Super, yeah. Here's another question. What are some key things to keep in mind when shifting a game from youth to adult participants? Kathleen mentioned that youth can sometimes need more rapid progression through the rules, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that just one thing that I've experienced, this is completely based on personal experience, is that often adult learners have showed up with a lot more resistance to making that shift to a restorative paradigm. And I think that's just because of reinforced experiences and beliefs from their whole life, whereas younger learners have maybe more neuroplasticity and are ready to sort of challenge their assumptions and beliefs more readily. And there's sort of that peer like momentum of learning and trying and being excited and letting go of what you thought before and trying something new. So I think one thing that I've learned is that I need to be very patient and supportive of adult learners and make sure that people don't take things so seriously that they take on a sense of shame when something is really hard and they don't think it's going to be hard, and really generating a community of support for that adult learning group.
Yeah, I would echo all of that and just add that oftentimes I'm more intentional about even more relationship building leading up to a skill building game that invites a fair amount of risk with adults, because in my experience, youth are more willing to kind of just jump in and try it out and aren't too worried about mistakes, whereas adults kind of need to feel that it really is safe and trusting and feel able to contribute in that way. And so, which is just because adults are kind of more specialized and have a little bit more of that, you know, sometimes hesitation around trying something new that falls out of the range of specialty.
I really appreciate that note. Thinking about just development psychology and ways in which people show up as learners. So thank you for that. There's another question here about, I'm the only teacher at my school who has implemented RJ. My principal's allowing me to teach the skills I've learned to our staff so that we can see a bigger improvement school-wide. So what are your suggestions for working with adults in the school who might be resistant to this style of teaching and learning? And you mentioned some of those kinds of things, but yeah, what other kinds of ways to think about resistance?
One of the things, you know, I don't know if this is going to be realistic in your particular environment, but if there's any flexibility where you could start doing a community of learning around restorative practices with people that are already open to it, so the people who in your building are already curious or are willing to try something new, inviting them in first to sort of say like, hey, these are some of the games and activities that I want to play, and start playing them with people who are less resistant, right? They're like the early adopters. And then what we've noticed, especially in the school setting, is that will often generate curiosity amongst other staff. Like, what is this thing that you're doing with this group? Or I saw that you're leading these connection circles in your classroom, or you know, students came to me saying that they're playing this game, Sia, or Curiosity Didn't Harm the Cat. I wonder what that's about and why you're doing it and why it's motivating the students so much. And sort of then welcoming in some of the people who are on the fence to come in and participate in these games and activities, and then hoping that will eventually bridge to the people who are the most resistant. This is something that we've done quite a bit of at LCJP, working with police officers who also show that range of willingness and resistance. So just trying to work in a gradual way to invite people in without pushing them to participate, as long as your principal can work with you on that.
And I'll just add, the more experiential it can be, the better, because when you're kind of presenting an idea as like this is what I'm sharing with you, then immediately there's going to be pushback and people saying, oh, that can possibly work. But if you can provide an experience where people are engaging with a scenario or engaging with real life and seeing, you know, oh, this is how that person is separate from this one behavior. This is how their needs led to that behavior. This is what the harmed party's needs are. And this is how kind of all those pieces can come together. They're having an experience of what looking through that restorative lens looks like. And then they're, through open-ended debrief questions, sharing that reflection openly. That's, you know, finding a way to communicate to people through facilitating experience tends to be a much better way to bring people on board than just kind of sharing, this is what RJ is, isn't it great?
And unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you all so very much for being with us. It is so evident that you have done your work, your homework, that you've been deeply reflective practitioners. And we're so grateful for your expertise and experience. I look forward to perusing the website more. I'm going to turn it over to Hannah now to close us up with some announcements and such.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hannah?
I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Lindsey, for your presentation. This was a very engaging and thought-provoking webinar. I really appreciate what you shared, and it was obviously very engaging. For the sake of time, I'm just going to really quickly zoom through all of these announcements. I will just say that the Zehr Institute has one upcoming webinar for this semester. On April 15th, we'll be having guest Talia Gonzalez with RJ Practices and Values in State Legislation. So for more information on that, visit the Zehr-institute.org website. Unfortunately, we don't have any STAR trainings coming up due to the nature of what's going on right now, but please be checking back regularly for any updates around that. There's a Restorative Justice Graduate Certificate that's offered, and you can learn more at the EMU website, which is on this page right here. We also have a Restorative Justice and Education, both a concentration for MA students and a certificate. To learn more, you can go to emu.edu/maed/restorative-justice. We also offer a master's in conflict transformation and in restorative justice, and you can go to this website to learn more if you're interested. If you'd like to learn more about what the Zehr Institute does, please look at the website at zehr.institute.org. And I think that's all from me. Thank you so much, Kathy and Kathleen and Lindsey.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all, and thank you so much, Kathy and Hannah. Appreciate it.